Hello and welcome back to my channel. My name is Jess and in today's tutorial we are going to be learning all about how to block a blanket. I think blocking a blanket does take a little bit of extra time, but it makes all the difference in your finished work, and I do think that it's worth taking that time to do it. So let's get into our tutorial. So first things first, I'm going to just tell you what exactly blocking is. Now, blocking is basically something that you can do to either soften your fibers in your project to make the overall feel a lot more enjoyable. The second thing that blocking does is it helps keep the shape of your project. Sometimes when you're creating a large project, you may have different tensions. You may crochet one row one day and another row a different day. And because of that, sometimes you'll have different tension in your crochet. So you may notice that, your edges aren't always perfectly lined up or whatever it may be. And I find to an extent, this does help. It's not going to fix every issue if you're dropping stitches and your stitch counts are off and your blanket's kind of going like this. It's not going to fix that, but for the most part, if you have some edges that maybe just aren't straight or as straight, this is going to help. So there's kind of two methods that I personally use for blocking, and it's either for me wet blocking or steam blocking, and I'm going to go over both methods here today. Now today, to start, we will start off with wet blocking, which is usually what I do first. Now, I will say I usually do both of these methods combined for my projects. I don't know if that's necessary. As long as you do one or the other, I think that's fine. I kind of like having both done. I feel like it does make your final project that much better. So today I'm just going to be working on this tiny little granny square that I made just to swatch to show you kind of what I do. But you just work on whatever project you're working on that you're needing to block. So for supplies for blocking, for wet blocking, the only thing you really need is either a tub of water, like a bowl or a tub, depending on how big your project is, or a washing machine. So personally for myself, I like to just use the washing machine. I find it the easiest. I put it on a really gentle cycle, cold, and I do put on a spin cycle as well, just to get any excess water out. And then all I do is I use this soap called Rapture. You don't have to use this specific soap. It's just one that I picked up that I've really been enjoying. It's a no rinse delicate wash, and I think that it does the trick. All I do is I just put a capful into the washing machine directly onto the blanket, or maybe a little bit more than a capful, and I just put it on a gentle cycle. That is the only thing I do with wet blocking. I put it through a full cycle of washing, and then once it's done, I take it to my mat. So pretending that this is wet, I use these mats that I bought just at Walmart. They are just like the puzzle piece foam mats. They come apart. They're for kids, but they are so cheap. And personally, I don't block quite enough blankets for me to be able to afford one of those really expensive blocking mats. So I find that this works just fine. I have never had any issues with it. It does the trick. So this is what I use, but you can use anything. So don't mind me, this kind of ugly mat is not pretty, but it works. So what I do is I take my now wet project, we'll pretend that this is wet, and I lay it down on my mats. Now, basically what we're trying to do is we want to pull our project just ever so slightly. You don't want to over pull it, but we want to pull it so it's as straight as possible. So how I do that is I just use my fabric pins here, and to start off, in this case, because I'm working on this one that has a 5, that works well because it's a straight edge. You can also use a tape measure for this. But what I'm going to do is I'm just going to kind of line up my edge here with that 5 line. I'm going to take one of my fabric pins here, and I'm just going to put that in the corner, and I'm going to pull it a little bit up to the top there. Then I'm going to take another one and I'm going to do the exact same thing in the other corner, just like that. Now, again, I don't want to overstretch it, but I want to basically put it in the position that I want the final project to look like. Because once you block your project, it usually keeps that shape, which is what we want. So I'm going to continue and complete all 4 corners first. Now I don't have a line on this edge, so I could use a ruler, or I can just use my eyes. If it's obvious, if it's straight or not. If not, just use a ruler. And I'm just going to pin the corners. Now on a bigger project, I would also pin in between, just placing as many pins along the edges that you need to. There's no rhyme or reason. Just keeping in mind the general rule of not over pulling. Because if you over pull like this, first of all, it's going to take a weird shape. But also, most likely with that much pull, it's not going to keep that shape. That's why this, it does help fix small problems, but if you have big issues with your project, it's probably not going to fix that for you. So here we are, we have our wet project pinned down to our mat. This is what it looks like. We just have it pinned there. Now all we need to do right now is let this dry, and you need to let it fully dry. It's really important. I usually give my projects 2 to 3 days to dry before I take my pins out, because it's just laying flat. It's gonna take a while to dry. So just give yourself some time for that, and factor in that time so that you can do this properly. Because if you take the pins out when it's still wet, it's not gonna do what you want. All right, so now our project is at a point where it is fully dry, and so we're gonna do the next step. Now, you can either do this step with your pins in place, or you can take them out. If you have the shape you want with the wet blocking, I would take them out. Well, that's what I do. I tend to take mine out. So I'm just going to take out my pins. And then I have my wet blocked project completed. Now, mine was already pretty straight, and I didn't wet this, so you're not going to notice any difference, but that's just the process of how to do it. Next, after I've completed wet blocking my project, I move over to steam blocking. Now, basically, steam blocking is a similar method to wet blocking. You're basically breaking down the fiber and making it a little bit, I find it makes it a lot softer. I also find if you have a lot of ends that you've weaved in, especially in granny squares, I find that blocking it, especially with the steam, just holds those fibers together. Not melts them, but kind of melts them together in a sense that they just stay a little bit better. So for steam blocking, I use just my regular iron. Now, my iron has the spray setting, which is to get it wet. And then it also has the steam setting, which is what I use the most with this. Now, basically what I usually do with this is I set this down, I turn my iron on, and I usually turn it on to the highest setting that it can go. And all I'm basically doing is once it's nice and hot, I'm not going to turn it on now, but once it's hot, all I do to start is hover over top of my project. Now, hover. We're not touching the fabric, because if you touch it, it will burn or melt. So it's super important that you're not touching it. You're not laying it down and doing this. You're just hovering over as close as you can get to the project with that heat. And that heat is what's going to kind of break down those fibers and make them softer. Then every once in a while, once I'm in this position of just hovering, I will push my steam button and it will expel a bunch of steam. And that, coupled with the heat, is basically what you're doing when you're steam blocking. Now, if you don't have an iron, I think just a regular clothes steamer would also work. Anything that creates steam and heat is going to work for this. I personally find steam blocking makes your project 10 times softer, which is what I look for when I'm making any blankets or doing anything like that. So this is probably my favorite way to block, but if you have errors in your edges, they aren't straight, wet blocking is great because you can keep that shape. You can also steam block with your pattern, with your project pinned. I just find it difficult because the pins get in the way. So that is how I wet and steam block my projects. I hope that this was helpful for you guys. Let us know in the comments down below if you have any questions or concerns. Otherwise, we hope you guys have a lovely day and we'll see you in the next one. Bye!